Srikanth. I am WWF-India's naturalist. Today, since you all see a lot of backyard birds that may be migratory and have come towards you during the summers, it's a good opportunity to learn about the migratory birds around us. So I'll share a small presentation and discuss with you all about what these migratory birds are, what is migration, why are birds actually migrating, and what are basic ways that you can actually help a particular bird to migrate smoothly. And I'll share some interesting facts, and probably you may also get to hear a few sounds that I make of some migratory birds around. So let's begin. So hope you are able to see the screen. Now, the first bird that you actually see here is the bar-headed goose. I'll tell you more about it later, but just observe how beautiful the migratory bird here is. Now, moving forward, you all see in bold a very nice term called migration. I'm hoping you all are able to guess what that term is. It's not a difficult term. So basically what migration is, it is nothing but a seasonal pattern or a seasonal movement of animals from one region to another, basically in response to changes in the weather, food supply, in their breeding patterns, or any particular competition around them. Now this mainly occurs in the northern hemisphere, right? And in simple terms to put forward, when the climate gets really harsh, when the temperature gets really harsh, it's basically when a bird will move from a colder area to a warmer area. Now, during the cold winters, it becomes very difficult for a particular bird to survive. That's why a particular bird would move from a colder Arctic areas to a more southern part of the world where it is much more warmer and easier for the bird to survive. Similarly, once the temperature starts getting too warm, the bird would simply go back to its original place and survive in the much better conditions and more of the spring conditions where a bird will have access to more amount of food supply. All right, moving forward, why do birds actually migrate? So since you've heard about what migration is, I've already explained to you that because of the seasonal pattern movements and changes in the climate patterns, that is one main reason why a bird would actually migrate. Now, this can actually happen over a period of years regularly, and it can also happen all of a sudden. And now this is mainly because of climate conditions, just to get rid of any particular harsh weather. So that can be from warm, cold. It can also be simply where the food supply is scarce. So if a particular bird is not able to get any amount of food, or is not able to actually achieve that amount of satisfaction in the amount of food that they're getting, and if they are short on their particular food for their family and children around, they would simply have to migrate where there is more availability of food. Now, there would be also changes in the temperature, and because of which the food supply would be less, and this may occur on a seasonal basis also. That is why a bird would have to decide if this particular season wishes to stay in this area, or because in this particular season it would have to move. Just like in the Arctic areas, when it is really cold in the winters, a bird would simply migrate and say that, I have more amount of food in the southern parts of the world, so I will go there and eat. But once it starts getting pleasant in the Arctic, once it's more of the spring conditions in the Arctic, or we say the Arctic summers, a bird would simply come back there where it actually belongs. And because of all the insects that would come up there and all the insects that would come out in the spring conditions, a bird would simply come and feed there, right? So it's mainly in the north where the abundance of food is there in the summer seasons, and there's little amount of food during the winters. And also it also mainly depends upon the competition within the species, or it can be intraspecific or it can be interspecific. And now in the southern parts of the world, food is mainly available throughout the year, but it's mainly the competition that arises that then lets the bird decide whether it's going to be suitable for migration or not. Now, some basic types of birds based on the basis of migrations that we would see on a day-to-day basis. Now, as we've already discussed, birds that simply move in a seasonal pattern from one place to the other, that's nothing but the migratory birds and bird. Now, the image that you're seeing right now in front of you is of an Asian quail. It's a very beautiful singer and it never makes its own nest. It goes and lays its eggs in other birds' nests like a sunbird or a crow for that matter, can be anything. And a very interesting thing is the male and female look very different. The male has a very bright black color, a glossy black with a bright red color eye and a yellow color beak, palish in color, while the female would be brown in color with white spots, yellow color beak and again a red color eye. Now both of them have very long tails and they are very melodious when they come to sing. And it's mainly the males that would nicely sing and be more vocal and melodious, right? But the house sparrow that we generally see around us, they are the ones that are resident and throughout are there in that particular region. But we also have seen of late that there has been a slight movement of house sparrows from the urban areas to the rural areas, mainly for survival and to find food better. So that's not really migration, it's basically in the same area. So that's why we wouldn't term that as migration, right? So they are your resident birds, while the quails are more of summer visitors. I'm sure you might have been hearing them throughout your day or early mornings or late evenings when you would get to hear them, or they are more vocal during that time. Now, there are birds like the house sparrows that do not migrate, as I said, and they have basically adapted towards their suitable environment around, while birds like the Asian quail would arrive during the summer seasons, mainly, that is spring, that we would generally relate to, and it's more of it would return back to their wintering grounds during the fall. Now, as I said earlier, the very interesting bar-headed goose. Now, do you know the bar-headed goose would actually fly all over the Himalayas and come and meet us in parts of the country, like in areas of Delhi or in parts of Maharashtra or in parts of Tamil Nadu. And it's a very beautiful movement of their migration. They come in different formations. So a bird migration would also depend on the different types of formations that they have. Example, some birds would probably migrate in a V formation. Some birds would probably migrate in a line kind of formation. All these formations depend and help a particular bird survive in their group, because there is a lot of energy that is needed during migration, and a bird would want to spend less amount of energy wherever they can. So they would adapt to strategies and different patterns in their movement in order to capture that lost amount of energy and actually reduce their energy loss during their migration. So a bar-headed goose is very interesting and is known as one of the highest flying birds and flies all the way above the Himalayas, right? So these mainly occur during the winter season, and they mainly migrate from northern parts of the world to the eastern parts of the world to mainly survive the harsh winters there. Now, there are some birds that are called transients. Now, birds that generally just stop, or it's more of a stopover, just like if we would fly a long distance on a plane, we would basically have a stopover. Similarly, there are these birds that basically have these long migrations where they tend to stop for a particular amount of days or a particular time of the year in order to survive better. So example, Amur falcon would basically fly from the northeast of the world to all the way till about Africa, but it would make a short stop in parts of Maharashtra and central or southern parts of India in order to survive better. So the Amur falcon is one of the smallest birds of prey or smallest falcons, and very fast also in their bird. And they depend on feeding during these transient, because feeding in abundance will also help the bird fly a longer duration. And there are some trans-Saharan birds like the swallow that would basically stop at different parts of the world in order to complete their migration. Right, that's your Amul falcon. Okay, now it's interesting to actually know that there are a lot of birds that actually migrate really long distances. So a very interesting example, let me share with you, is the Arctic tern. Now, if you see the Arctic tern that is shown by the red color arrow, see the movement pattern of from where to where the bird actually ends up going. Now, the complete movement of the bird is close to about 75,000 kilometers. Now, can you imagine that how far that bird would actually go? It is hardly the size of what we would say, probably smaller than what, or more amount the size of what a pigeon would be, but just more elongated and pointed wings that probably helps the bird migrate easier. And imagine that bird going all the way from the Arctic regions to places like Antarctica. So that's really beautiful to see such a vast migration in such a small bird. you know and apart from that, we can also see the Amur falcon that is marked in the light green. We can also see the northern wheatear that is more of the sky blue, and you can see the short-tailed shorewater that is in deep blue that you can see around. So you can probably also make your own map on different understandings of how a bird is migrating and from where it is actually migrating, to actually see how fascinating these are. So you can probably take a world map on your Microsoft Paint or on a paper, and simply try and trace the different types of birds that you may know are actually migrating to which countries or which parts of the world. Now, people often believe that a bird would only migrate if they have wings for flight. But what about the birds that are actually flightless? A common example is your penguins. Now, there are a lot of penguins that actually migrate by swimming. That is their adaptive technique that they've used in order to survive harsh weathers or avoid different kinds of competition that are around. And they may actually end up migrating to over about 1,000 kilometers. So that's equally good if you try to, if you try to swim. So if I try to swim more than about a kilometer, I go panting all the way. Imagine how this bird is managing to do that. Now, when it comes to types of bird migration, it's important to know that you can broadly categorize these migration into a structure of long distance migration or a short distance migration. Apart from that, we can also talk about altitudinal migration and something called longitudinal migration. Now, what is not long distance migration? So if we see long distance migration is nothing but a journey that is really far off, like our Arctic tern, something like 75,000 kilometers, or even something like a 10,000 kilometers is really a long distance migration. So a bird basically moving from a complete different temperature to a complete different temperature in another part of the world. That is nothing but your long distance migration. So the examples here are northern pintail and northern shovelers. So we would generally see these birds around parts of April or May till all the way till about October in more of the Siberian countries or European countries. And you may also end up seeing these same birds coming all the way to parts of India or southern parts of the world during the during the months of about December to about March. Now it's very interesting looking at the size of these birds also, but a very important thing is they depend on the strategies of their flight. So it can be a V formation, a U formation, or any particular formation which would help them survive the loss of that particular energy. Now, short distance migration is more triggered by sudden changes in the temperature or competition. These you may see in birds like a grey wagtail or a white-tailed lapwing. So, grey wagtail in India migrates from the lower Himalayas all the way to Tamil Nadu. And a very interesting thing is there is the school in Tamil Nadu that actually appreciated and celebrated the migration of the grey wagtail. How interesting is that? If you know any particular migratory bird around you, do you think it is necessary that you can actually end up celebrating these birds with happiness, with playing music? because it's so interesting that you get to see these birds only for a limited period, or it's more like a limited edition bird during that particular time of the year, right? Moving forward to the altitudinal migration, a classic example, bar-headed goose doesn't go anywhere, but you always see this bird moving from up to down or downwards to upwards. In simple terms, it's from lowland areas to the highland areas or the highland areas to the lowland areas. These may be specifically during different times or different months of the year, but as I would say, that is flying all the way from low grasslands in Maharashtra all the way till parts of Himalayas, going all the way to the Himalayas and then moving forward, right? So it's very interesting to know these kinds of altitudinal migration. And how this is actually helping the bird is because these birds have a much better lung capacity than what humans would have. Now, the lung capacity here depends on, so the oxygen that we breathe has to go through an inhaling and exhaling method, and that's why the flow of air in our body is bidirectional. But in a bird like the bar-headed goose, the flow of the air is more or less unidirectional. The reason, because they have something called air sacs that actually traps these airs and particularly absorbs that oxygen which is lost during the exhaling of a particular bird, right? Now, moving forward to longitudinal migration. Simply just understanding what longitudinal here stands for is when a bird basically migrates from east to the west part of the world, or it can be vice versa. In this example here is the knob-billed duck or the comb-billed duck. A very interesting thing is you can see the comb-like structure on the male of a knob-billed duck, but in a female, you don't see the comb-billed structure. But in simple terms, you can just identify the bird with a more whitish, pure whitish face with a few spots and a glossy bluish wing that you would also end up seeing in the bird. Now, factors that actually affect a bird's migration or influence a bird's migration are completely dependent on factors something like the food availability, breeding, diseases, competition, and predators. Going a bit of detail in each one of these are, so the food scarcity is one of the main reasons, as we always mention during migration, because a bird needs to keep feeding in order to survive its day-to-day life. Now, if all birds stay in a particular region throughout the year, so there's going to be less amount of food for them to share, and that's going to end up in a lot of scarcity of their food that would result in less amount of breeding, and it would be very stressed for a particular bird because the parents would be undernourished, or the hatchlings will not get the appropriate food in order to move from one particular area or escape any particular predator. So it's very important that a bird has enough or abundant amount of food in order to survive. Now, moving forward to the breeding of a bird. So the breeding over years, depends on the particular, or is evolved on different migratory patterns in a particular bird from timing and destination. So bird generally would breed around March to about say June, and would migrate the other times in order to survive better. So probably March to June is a better period of time for them to survive spring in the Arctic areas. So they would breed usually during that time. But apart from those, like from about October to about March, when they are not able to breed suitably that time, they would actually have to migrate to a particular area in order to start their breeding process better. Now, this also helps birds to take advantage of a wide variety of suitable conditions. That is, again, the availability of food, how the weather conditions are. Depending on these conditions, a bird egg can also determine the sex of a bird. So example, if the temperature of the egg is too high or the temperature of the egg is too low, it may actually fluctuate the probability of it being a male bird or a female bird. So all these are probably very important for a bird to actually understand and determine before it actually starts its routine of migration, and thus it may actually affect the bird during migration. Now, diseases are very important to know because a lot of birds go and visit feeders because it's more like a complementary food supply to a lot of birds. But it's very important that because of feeders, there are a lot of possibility of diseases that can be accumulated. So it's important that a bird decides whether it needs to go to that particular feeder or feed by its own in order to get rid of that particular diseased ground. So the diseases mainly can be, avian pox, bird flu, aspergillosis. So all of these that may actually affect a particular bird's health and then not help the bird breed or actually find its own food. So it's important that a bird actually understand these. Why? Because one particular weather in an area can completely decimate a bird, or destroy a lot of birds because of the temperature or any particular disease that it's carrying with it because of that, or any diseased bacteria or protozoan that is actually influenced because of that temperature around. So it can actually kill a lot of birds. That's why a bird would actually have to migrate in order to survive those pandemics. Now, a competition that is there, a classic competition that we see is by the invasive species, like in a country like India, where we would see the invasive rock pigeons that are there that may not help a bird like a sparrow survive around. Now, sparrows were earlier abundant around urban areas, but even if we think that, okay, the sparrows are affected by radiation, might be affected by the habitat loss or habitat fragmentation that is around, we need to understand that if we constantly keep feeding birds, a lot of birds are influenced by that technique and probably breed in large numbers. One example is the rock pigeon that has completely taken over most of the country areas, and it has resulted in the population of sparrows actually moving towards the rural areas in order to survive better, because the dominant species here are birds like crows or the birds like invasive rock pigeons and many other different doves that you can see around, that are mainly the colonizers that result to more amount of competition that is being developed. And hence we need to actually think if a bird actually requires that feeding that should be done, or we should let birds live by themselves and manage their own nest sites, or manage their own food and take care of their own lives, and nature takes that own test. So it's a personal decision that you all need to really think about, if whether we need to provide a particular bird with food. Now, there are certain difficulties where a bird would, have to face during migration. So we've already spoken a lot about the height, where, a bar-headed goose would fly over the Himalayas. That's about close to 30,000 feet, 30 to 32,000 feet. It's so high you can't even imagine, but you can still manage to end up seeing that bird coming all the way from such highland areas, moving all the way to the lowland grasslands. But a speciality is the real small songbirds, the passeriforms that we see. They migrate at heights of from about 2000 to about all the way till about 5000 kilometers, but majority of them about sticking to about 2500 feet below. So that's very interesting how they actually migrate. So a bird also needs to go on to strategies, that because they may be facing a lot of predators during the daytime, so they may have to take strategies of migrating during the night times. So example, a lot of birds like the songbirds may actually migrate during the night times, or in some cases there are known to be the greater flamingos that may migrate during the night times in order to escape harsh conditions like the heat, or escape the predators around. Now, they need to take into consideration about the weather, because the weather affects them, and they face a very difficult challenge to go through when they have weather conditions. So example, if suddenly there's a storm or hazard that comes in, or there's massive amount of rainfall in a particular place, a bird that was scheduled, so had its scheduled flight to go from one particular area of the world to the other, probably on a Wednesday evening, 6 o'clock, and gets to its destination by 10 p.m., it would have to change its migratory pattern and probably have to do that next day morning because of the weather conditions being so bad at night. So those are some things that may affect a particular bird when it is migrating. Now, the direction of speed and wind. So sometimes the wind directly comes at you, comes at the bird, that helps, and probably may not help the bird survive well if it's a really small one. But if they understand the timing of the direction of wind and a particular time of how the speed is flowing, they may actually use that as a beneficial way, and moderate that in such a way where it is just gliding through that particular wind in order to survive easier. Now, collisions are a very disturbing sight sometimes when you see a lot of birds banging into your windows or banging into skyscrapers that are probably built from top to bottom with glass. So, a lot of birds, when they migrate, they are not able to see long distances. And because of that, what happens is they see the reflection of different trees and the landscapes around. Because of the glass is a reflection, and straight run into them, that results in a massive damage to the wing or the skull, and may result in fatality in a particular bird. So it's important that when a bird is probably migrating during the daytime, we keep the doors and windows open in order to not support a bird's fatality. So we could actually guide them through these particular disturbance or difficulties, which will help them migrate comfortably. In order to boost their survival, we can also look at placing water baths in our balconies or windows. So a bird would simply come and relax in your balcony, take a nice sip of water, have a fresh bath, and simply move on. That will also give you a way of just looking at the bird, feeling really great, and also you can take some wonderful images from the bird that is trying to display in front of you. So these are some things that we need to keep in mind, that may actually end up becoming a difficulty for a particular bird. So we need to try and help in whatever way possible to ensure a bird's comfortable way during its flight during migration. Some birds also face a lot of exhaustion. So as I said earlier, because they are migrating such long distances, it's good and beneficial if we actually place water baths for them so that they can comfortably rest for some time in that particular area. Now, there are some cases where, probably because of these long distance migration, some birds have just gone real tired and have landed in some lakes all of a sudden. So we've seen some cases like the red-breasted merganser in parts of Maharashtra. We've seen the long-billed dovitcher. So these are birds that suddenly just stop all of a sudden because of their migration patterns, and because they may be transient visitors, or they may just have faced something like an exhaustion, because of which they wanted to chill in particular areas for some time, just relax in some particular areas in order to get themselves completely fit again in order to take their further migration process. Uh, we've already discussed some interesting example like the very interesting Arctic tern. Look at the size of the bird. It has a beautiful black cap during its breeding season, and a very interesting adaptation that the bird has also taken is, once it's done with its breeding season, it goes into its off-white and brownish color in order to actually, not alert any particular predator because of the bright colors that it may actually have during its breeding season. So those are some simple strategies that a bird have also, evolved over time in taking, and simply help the bird in migrating better over a period of time. So that's the amount of migration. You can see the breeding grounds of the bird and the wintering grounds of the bird. Now see the complex 75,000 kilometers it's actually taken to go to its breeding ground or go to its wintering ground. So that's brilliant in this particular bird. I don't think you can think of any other bird that is actually taking so much pain and so much enthusiasm in trying to migrate, because which bird would actually migrate such kilometers? Right. So if you see that this is the pattern of some of the highest flying birds in the world, we see our cranes and swans, and we see bar-headed goose that are flying really on top, while we've already discussed about, the songbirds that fly really, mainly up to about 5,000 kilometers. Now, some very interesting facts are, some birds are really fast when they are trying to migrate. So this particular bird called the great snipe has probably got the award of the fastest migratory bird, and it flies at around 60,000 miles per hour to complete a distance of about 4,200 miles. So that's some real fast techniques that a bird is actually doing, probably to get to its destination real fast, because it knows tomorrow there's a storm coming up, so it needs to cover up that particular distance, or there may be a predator around, so it wants to escape the sight of any particular predator, and that's why it's going with that particular speed. Uh, we also see the very interesting bar-tailed godwit that was recently known to make a non-stop flight from all the way parts of New Zealand and Australia, going all the way to the parts of Alaska, that is about 7,000 miles without stopping. Now imagine, that is incredible. Can you drive or can you walk a particular amount of kilometers without stopping? So can you do something like 50 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers without stopping just while walking? Or when you're driving 500 kilometers at a stretch, that's more like a record that you all are trying to make, just like what the bar-tailed godwit would do. And a very interesting thing, that birds enter the state called hyperhagia. Now, in order to prepare migration, now what birds do is they will go to every fast food joint that they can visit and feed almost every amount of food that they can, build themselves up, buff themselves up, make themselves probably nice and fat, and this would actually help the bird in surviving or utilizing that energy when they are migrating constantly. So this we can take into consideration an example of Blackpool warbler that actually flies about 2,300 miles, 86 hours non-stop, and it utilizes its body weight in that way, where it has actually doubled its body weight because of its hyperhagia condition, in order to ensure that its movement and migration has been suitable. Now, before I also end, I'll give you a few examples of some sounds that you may be hearing, of some migratory birds around you. So a very simple example that probably everyone can guess is the Asian quail. So I've already described the bird earlier for you. Now you can hear something like ooh, 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 right? That's your call of the Asian quail. But some of you all might have also ended up seeing this bird called the brain fever bird. In simple terms, it's called the common hawk cuckoo. But if you want to understand birds and remember them with really unique names like the brain fever bird, uh, it gets its name from the sound that it actually makes. So if you actually listen to the sound, it's something like tu 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 tu. So in this way, you may actually see that the bird is just called common hawk cuckoo. But then you may take a guess that why is it actually called the brain fever bird? Now, if you actually try and understand the lyrics, what the bird is trying to say, it's something like tu 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 tu, brain fever, brain fever, brain fever, brain fever, right? So that's the kind of sound that the bird is actually trying to make, and that's why it's got its name, the brain fever bird. So I hope you've understood a lot about migration. You've understood about some interesting facts, what migration is. You've also understood about the various difficulties a bird may face during migration. You've understood the different factors that a bird basically looks at because it's wanting to migrate. So like factors like food availability, the competition, diseases, predators, and mainly the weather conditions that are there around. So if you see and understand those factors, you will understand why a bird is wanting to migrate. So do understand different migration stories, try and read more about migration, and do your bit of trying to help a particular bird during their migration. So we get to see more number of birds moving forward. And stay safe, take care. Do let me know if you have any other questions, and I'm sure I'll try my level best to help you all with the answer for that. So do list your questions on the below comment box, and have a good day ahead. Take care. Thank you.